Good evening and welcome to this multi-agency engagement event tonight. My name is Rob Barber. I'm the Deputy Chief Fire Officer for Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service, and I've been asked to chair this evening tonight. The purpose of tonight's event is to explain how multi-agency partners are working closely together to address the issues at Walleys Quarry, recognise the impact that this is having on local residents. We will also be discussing the recently released Public Health England report regarding the air quality monitoring. The management of the issues associated with Walleys Quarry has been moved from an incident management group to a strategic coordination group. Basically, this is a higher level of management oversight and provides all strategic leaders with an understanding of the issues locally. It also provides a link to central government in order to raise these issues at a national level. We have a panel of speakers this evening from key agencies involved in the Walleys Quarry incident. We have a number of those with us tonight, and I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves. Firstly, from Staffordshire County Council, Richard, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. I'm Richard Harling. I'm Director of Health and Care for Staffordshire County Council.
And from Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council, Martin?
Good evening, I'm Martin Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive at Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council.
And from the Environment Agency?
Hello, good evening. I'm Claire Dennis. I'm the Area Director for West Midlands for the Environment Agency.
Good evening, my name's Mark Liddiff. I am the Project Exec for the Walleys Quarry landfill for the Environment Agency.
And from Public Health England, we also have two speakers. Nick?
Good evening, I'm Dr. Nick Kutsia. I'm a consultant in health protection, public health doctor, and I work for the health protection team, PHE West Midlands.
And Ovnaya?
Yep, good evening everyone. I'm Ovnaya Sepai. I'm toxicologist at Public Health England and here obviously as a toxicologist. Thank you.
And finally from Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, CCG, Mark.
Yeah, good evening everybody. I'm Mark Seaton. I'm the Managing Director of the CCG in North Staffordshire. And for those that don't know, that's who commissions the health services on behalf of the population in North Staffordshire.
Thank you, panellists. And what we'll be doing this evening is running through a presentation, a few short slides, and then we'll be opening up to question and answers. But before we go into the presentation, I just need to cover off a few housekeeping issues related to the software that we're using this evening. And I'm going to ask Anthony Gale just to talk you through this, as he's far more technically gifted than I am.
Good evening, everyone. You won't be able to see me, but I'm just off camera, which is no great shame to anyone. But I'm just going to run you through how you can ask us a question on tonight's session. As Rob said, after the slides, we will be getting to your questions. Thank you to everyone who's already sent them in via email, by the way. We will get to those later on. So on your screen, you should see a small dashboard. If you can't see that, look for the dark grey box on the right-hand side of your screen, and that will have an orange arrow in it. Click that orange arrow, and it will expand, and you'll see a box that says questions. In that box, you can type a question, press enter. As soon as you do that, it will come through to us in the studio. And what we're going to do is, if you send us a question, we'll come to you, we'll unmute your microphone so you can actually ask it to the panel via audio. All being well, that will work fine. If for whatever reason your audio doesn't work, we'll simply just read out the question you've sent us. So again, just look for that dashboard on the right hand side of your screen, or the dark grey box, click the orange arrow, and in the question box there, you can type a question, send it through, and we will come to you. I'll give you another run through that before we get to the questions, but that's how you can get your question in this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. And as Anthony said, we'll endeavour to manage your questions in an appropriate way, but please bear with us as we navigate through the session. So if we move now to the presentation, I'm going to hand over for the first slide to Dr. Richard Harling.
Thank you, Rob. So this is an attempt just to give a quick summary of the situation as we currently understand it. So there has been an air pollution problem coming from the Walleys Quarry site since January. The main pollutant is hydrogen sulfide, which is responsible for the smell. We are monitoring monitoring air quality at the moment, and Public Health England will tell you a bit more about that in just a moment. We have also been monitoring the health impact. We do know that very many people have been suffering a range of symptoms, and it must be absolutely terrible for local residents having to endure this day after day. There are a range of sources of information about these symptoms. So there was a survey done by the local MP. There are some health impact statements which were submitted to the Borough Council. And then the County Council has what's called a symptom tracker where people can report day by day. All of these are telling us more or less the same thing, and that is that there are lots of people affected, that the symptoms are affecting people on a daily basis. They are a range of symptoms from the smell itself, so that is feeling sick, headaches, dizziness and disturbed sleep. A range of symptoms from the hydrogen sulfide gas, that is stinging eyes, difficulty breathing, and that especially affects people with underlying breathing problems such as asthma. And then many people are suffering mental health ill effects such as anxiety and depression. The expert scientific advice is that the long-term risk to health is likely to be low, and again, Public Health England will talk more about that in a moment. But as a group of agencies, we are getting increasingly concerned by how long this has been going on and the cumulative effect of exposure over such a long period, and especially not knowing for sure how much longer this might continue. So in short, we recognise the problem. It is real. Local residents are suffering, and we do want to do everything we can to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. Rob, I hand back to you now and then over to Public Health England, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And we're going to move on to slide 2 now. And Ovnaya and Nick are going to talk us through that. And then I'll pick up some questions as we go through.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So again, I'm with Public Health England, and our role is really to provide expert analysis of the air quality data that's provided to us by the Environment Agency, which I'm sure you have been viewing on the Environment Agency website. So we work with partners to interpret this data and to assess the health impacts, as has already been mentioned. So as a public health toxicologist or a toxicologist team, we have reviewed the exposure data, and that's summarized in that first table you see on this slide. So it shows the 4 monitoring points and the gases and particulates and chemicals, or VOCs, that have been monitored for at those 4 sites. So the way we do our risk assessment, very briefly, is that we look at the evidence that's published. We look at what are called guidance values that are published by authoritative bodies, and then we compare the exposure data that we receive from the Environment Agency to these guidelines. And we have usually sort of 3 sets of guidelines. Firstly would be very acute guidelines, and here we've been using the WHO air quality guidelines for 30 minutes, which is 7 micrograms, and we can use other values as well that are for really acute, which means a very short-term, relatively high exposure. Then we have the intermediate values, which are called the minimal risk levels, and we've been using the ATSDR value of 30 micrograms per meter cubed to assess the potential exposures and risks. We will also be looking at the longer term guidance values. And this is how we do our risk assessment. So we have the guidance values, we compare them to exposure data, and then we determine the level of risk. And as has already been mentioned, the levels that we're seeing now, we have seen significant exceedances of the short-term odor threshold, And this is obviously being reflected in the surveillance data that we're seeing with people's complaints and the health issues that have been reported to us. Twice in March, on the 7th and 8th of March, we did see a high peak which exceeded the WHO 24-hour guidance value, which is at 150. And what we do then with those values is that we average them out over a longer period of time in order to get what we call this intermediate minimal risk level that we are using. And you will see from the data that has been published in our risk assessment that at one of the monitoring stations, the level is relatively high and has remained high for a period of time. And it's because of that that we have indicated that we can no longer be comfortable with the levels that are out there in the environment, and that we have escalated this because we have to stress that we can't guarantee that there won't be longer term effects on the population. I think I'll leave it there for now and obviously take questions when we're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Ovna. And before we do take the first lot of questions, I'm just going to go through the last few slides. So if we go to slide 3 now, and that's Claire and Mark, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Rob. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So there's a couple of slides that we're just going to show. This first slide, there's a lot of information on there. So we have recently published this on our Citizen Space page, so you'll be able to see the details on there. But the main areas I just want to focus on for the next few minutes is around the strategy the Environment Agency has adopted with Walleys Quarry Limited. The strategy is around, obviously, the 3 elements that we've spoken to the community and others in past events, is around contain, capture and destroy. So the containing is all about keeping the gases produced within the landfill site when the waste decomposes. The capturing is all about collecting those gases and they're capturing inside the landfill so that they can be piped to the treatment plant. That treatment plant is what we call the gas utilization plant. And then that is where the gases are then destroyed. And that's about removing those gases safely, destroying the odours and any kind of pollution and chemicals that come from the landfill. And where possible, that will obviously create energy. Now, as you can see from the slide here, since January, when we have had obviously a huge increase in terms of complaints around the gases from the landfill sites, there's been a number of actions that have been taken place by the operator, instructed by the Environment Agency. Those actions, very many of you are very familiar with those. That's around things like the capping, both permanent capping and temporary capping on some of the cells. It's installing additional flares. And then there are other things around additional wells that have been installed. Now, we know that those actions to date have had some effect, but not the effect that we were hoping it would in terms of those gas emissions. So there is further work to be done and further instruction that we have given to the operator to carry out over the next few months. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. So again, under that strategy of containment, collection and destruction, the containment actions that will be coming in the next few months will be around the installation of a further temporary capping of the area of the landfill site. That's using some innovative technology being imported from the US, which is called Posi Shell. That's going to cover a further 20,000 cubic meters of the landfill site. So once that has been installed, we are looking at around about 70% of the site being capped. There's the additional wells that are going to be installed to do more of the collection of the gas. And there's also going to be work and further improvement on the gas management or the gas utilization plant. So there is a number of actions that we are doing as a regulator to hold the operator to account for them to fall in line and get these actions completed under those timeframes. And hopefully this slide, along with the previous slide, has given you a picture of terms of what we have done to date and the direction we're heading in the next few months. So that's me finished, Rob, and happy to take any questions when we get to the questions section. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll just move to the next slide now. I just want to talk through then from the next steps in terms of the multi-agency approach. As I've suggested, the strategic coordination group is now in place, and within that we are meeting on a weekly basis, and we've got a number of groups that are sitting beneath that strategic group. One is the scientific and technical advice cell. We've got another group looking at everything to do with all the communities that are being affected, whether that's residential communities, business communities, etc. And then we're looking at another group looking at all of the regulation and enforcement that we can bring to bear to remedy the issues that everybody is facing at the moment. And in addition to that, we've got a communication cell that's making sure we listen to the communities, engage with the communities on a regular basis, and get regular updates out to the communities on that regular basis. So that's how we're structured. I am now going to move to the questions that have started to come in. So those people, I've got a number of people on my list. I'm going to start with Chris Hannon. And Chris, if you can unmute your mic and ask your question to PHE, I think your question is directed.
If you just bear with me 1 second, Chris, I'm just going to unmute you on our end. Okay, if you yeah, okay, we should be able to hear you now, Chris. If you want to pop your questions to the panel. Hey there, Chris.
Okay, we seem to be having a little bit of issue. I'll ask Chris's question. So it's to PHE, I would suggest, or in fact it's EA. Why is the smell from the landfill worse when it rains and hangs around a lot longer?
I'm afraid I couldn't hear the question clearly.
Okay, so why is the smell from the landfill worse when it rains and hangs around a lot longer?
Rob, it's Mark from the Environment Agency here. I'll try and answer that question as best I can. With the gas of hydrogen sulfide, obviously there's different densities to that compared to obviously other gases that are obviously found in the air. And part of the kind of issues you find with different weather conditions is and you know, that's not just kind of rain, that's obviously wind and the atmospheric pressure. That will all have an impact on where the gases go and how long that they stay within the air and how they dissipate. So on today's type weather, with the rain and very little wind, it can cause the gases to remain in an area possibly for longer period of time than what you'd see if it was on a windy and more warmer day, and that dissipation. But you know, from a weather perspective, that can have an effect, and obviously we have seen that, you know, over the years with all types of landfills. The weather does play an effect with gas and odours.
Thanks, Mark, for that detailed answer. I'm going to move on now to Stephen Murray, and I know, Stephen, you've put in a number of questions. Can we take your first one that's directed to the PHE, please, and we'll open your mic now so you can ask directly to the panel.
So Stephen, if you just unmute yourself on your end, there's a microphone icon. If you just click that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah, I think we can hear you now.
Yeah, could you please provide me with the peer-reviewed scientific publications upon which you're basing the exposure and to have short-term and limited health effects, please?
So, Ovnaya, did you get that question?
No, I hear. Yes, thank you for your. Yes, I was able to hear that quite clearly. Thank you. Yes, of course, we can provide you with not only where the actual values are published, but also the underlying publications that those values are based on. Yes, of course, we can do that. And of course, that's exactly what we would do, is to look at those underlying data. So I don't know how we do this. Do we? Do I send it to? Well, we'll figure it out. We'll definitely quite easily get that to you. I would also recommend you look at the risk assessment because there are some references in that as well that are published.
Okay, thanks, Ovna. And Stephen, if you could, in one of the questions, just provide your email address, then we can pass any information over to you via email. That would be the most appropriate way to deal with that, I think. Okay. So I'm going to go to Gary Badley next. And your question is, it's kind of twofold, so I would suggest it's for the EA and Public Health England, but if you unmute your mic, we can take your question now.
Hello.
Hi, Gary.
Hi. All right. I was on the conference call a couple of weeks ago. I was asking about the readings and where we can find them. So I was having a little look, and it was showing that PTECs like the benzine, etc., they've been shown at several monitoring stations. But underneath that, it says that the data isn't being made available to the PHE or public. I'm just wondering why that is.
Okay, Claire or Mark, can you take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that again, Rob. So, yeah, there's 2 monitoring stations that we are gathering data on for BTEC and for nitrogen oxide. That information is being made available. I think that where you've read that text, I think that was unfortunately old text that should have not been in that report. But just to confirm now on this call that data is being collated and we are passing it on to PHE. It is done on a 3 monthly report, so we've started gathering that information, and I think the 3 months are now coming up. So that first lot of data will be passed over to PHE to then have a look, and then we will be able to cascade the information and data on that to the public in the next report that goes out.
Thank you, Mark. Next questions come from Nikki Thompson, and this is directed to the EA once again. So Claire or Mark, if you can pick this up, and Nikki, if you can unmute yourself, you should have a direct line then to the panel.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. I would like to ask Environment Agency if they are 100% sure that the odor is coming from the landfill and there are no other sources that this smell could come from. Thank you.
So I'll come in here, Rob. We always look at all sources, and there have been various other suggestions made, particularly by the operator, that the odour could be coming from other places. The critical bit is that what we've got is 2 occasions over this period where our officers have been able to track an odour from off-site back onto site. And that is why we've issued Walleys Quarry Limited with non-compliance notices in relation to that. The important thing here is that even if it does mean that there are other sources, the primary source is likely to be the landfill. That's why we're focusing our attention on them. But we're also continuing to monitor the environment in the surrounding area so that we understand, and that partners who also regulate other businesses understand what's happening. But there's no suggestion that there is anything that would lead us to not focus primarily on Walleys Quarry Limited.
Thank you, Claire. I'm just going to move back now to Stephen Murray. And Stephen, you had a question regarding core samples for Claire. So if you could unmute yourself, in fact, you're unmuted now. Go ahead.
Yes, hello Claire, thank you for taking the question. Can I ask, will you be taking core samples when the new gas wells are put in?
So Stephen, the position is the same as it has been when I've answered this question previously. Our focus is on looking at what is happening now and trying to solve the problem now, and that will always be our primary focus. We are, as part of that, inevitably building a case which is looking at what has happened and whether and what sanctions may be appropriate in the future. So we continue to do that. It's part of what may become a legal case, so I can't speak about the detail. But if that is necessary, then what we'll do is we'll do that in the best way for us to have the right evidence to be able to take any case should it come to that in the future. And that may or may not be linked to what is being done with drilling those wells. But it is absolutely something that is part of the bigger picture.
Thanks, Claire. We got Nikki Thompson next, and it's a question for PHE, but it also might be relevant to the CCG as well. So, Nikki, if you could unmute your mic and ask your question, please.
Hi again. Thank you. I would just like to ask Public Health England if they have collected the data from the GP practices to see causes data to see what people have feedback to their GPs, and to collect the data and look at real situations and real scenarios, because I have a friend who I know she's been seeing a GP and she's suffering at the moment. So I want to understand if Public Health England is looking at that as well, not just at the readings with regards to sulfate. I hope this makes sense.
I can answer that, Rob.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that question. I'll kick off and then we can see if somebody else from the health side wants to add. Monitoring the GP health data is underway. It's a complex business because one has to get a very clear protocol for that. People don't present with symptoms and signs to GPs that necessarily stack up in relation to environmental exposures, but there's a way of doing that, and we're collaborating with our county council colleagues, the CCG and the Keele University in doing that in a systematic way. It will look at groups of presenting syndromes, be it things like difficulty breathing, for example, or redness of eyes, and track that over time in GP practices close to the site and further away, and relate that to the environmental exposure data. Now that will take some time. It's busy going through ethical approval at the moment. The other data that we've got is there's a national program that's what we call primary care syndrome data. It's presentation similar to what I've just described. That has looked at the whole postcode area as a whole. Unfortunately, it's not as sensitive to pick out individual GP practices, but that has been tracked, and that's been fairly useful in giving some overall assurances. And in addition, the same with A&E attendances at the University Hospital. The A&E attendances that have come up with nothing specific related, but we're keeping an eye on that. I'll stop at that point, and maybe some of my health colleagues want to join with that.
Shall I come in?
Thanks, Nick. Is there anything you would like to add on that, Ovni?
I think that pretty much covers it. It is difficult, as Nick suggests, because knowing where people turn up in terms of with their symptoms, some will turn up at the GP, some will turn up at the optometrist when they've got eye problems, because we do commission locally an eye service for people with inflamed eyes. So it's quite broad spread of where people might turn up. And of course, collating that information is complicated and difficult. But as Nick says, that data is all being collated across the piece, but it will take time to actually make that any correlation between this environmental issue and any presentation in healthcare settings. And that's pretty much all I got to say on that.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so we've got the next question has come from David Grenwood, And I think this is again kind of two panel members are going to be answering this, EA and the Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council. So David, if you unmute yourself, or you're unmuted now, and ask your question, please.
Yeah, so I've got a question. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, well, the question I've got relates to the indoors monitoring. Now, as Claire has pointed out, and you guys put, there's plenty of information relating to the outdoors air quality. You can't help but trip over the information, for want of a better expression. You know, nothing wrong with that. But my concern is what's happened to site of the indoors monitoring data, because my concern here is that in the outside air, the air is going to be dispersed, the pollutants will be dispersed as well, but indoors, they're liable to be more concentrated. Now, I've got two questions. Has any indoor monitoring data been collected? That's question number one. And if so, why hasn't this data been published?
Okay, I think it's probably, shall I pick that one up? Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question. The council has collected some indoor data. We've used handheld equipment called a Jerome, and what we've done with that is we've identified a number of specimen properties where we have either responded in real time to complaints of odours and gone round to assess those and also measure with these Jerome handheld devices. And we've also at times left the Jeromes running in people's properties, again in these specimen properties, for a period of time in order to monitor the information over a duration of a day or half a day or a couple of days, or depending on the situation. Now, we have been, you'll be aware potentially from some of the reports that have gone to our cabinet, that one of the things that the council is currently doing is assessing whether or not there's a case for statutory nuisance, which is quite a complex piece of regulation that the council would lead on. And the data that we've collected indoors is being collected for that purpose. So at this stage, that data we're having analysed with our expert consultants that are working with us on this, and really we're currently reviewing whether or not we're in a position to release that data before we reach the conclusion of our judgments around the enforcement action for which the data is being collected. So it's really sort of a judgment about how we use that data in terms of the purpose for which it's being held or for which it was collected, and whether or not we risk compromising that by releasing it ahead of time.
Thank you, Martin. Is there any other panel members that want to add to that answer at all? No, I can't see anybody indicating. So the next question I'm going to move on to. Oh, sorry, who was that?
It's Nick here. I don't seem to be able to indicate, but I could just say that we've had early sight of that data. It's not official as yet, so that is being ratified, as Martin was saying. But I think the levels that one would see there are similar to what one would see from the environmental data. They track those. I would also say that the kind of exposure levels we're seeing are what I would call, they come in peaks. They're quite, they come in peaks and troughs. So clearly what happens inside people's houses will lag that by some time, but the concentrations that some of those reports are showing are similar to what you'd see outside. Again, the advice there is once the peak has passed and the main kind of spike in odor has passed, to make sure that the residence is ventilated. That's absolutely key. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to move on to the next question then from Anthony Alloway. and I believe your question's directed to Public Health England. So Anthony, if you unmute yourself, you're free to ask your question.
Hi, Anthony. Just on your dashboard, if you just look for the microphone symbol, which is at the top of the dark grey panel, if you click that, you'll unmute yourself and you'll be able to ask your question directly to the panel.
Finally found it.
Well done.
I did ask a question through a text, but if I can remember rightly, we all know the effects of hydrogen sulfide. And of course, I think the World Health Organization said it's not too bad as long as it's not in high quantities. But as we all know, or been told as well, when you're smoking, there's over 80 chemicals that are cancer causing. Now, if you're smoking when there's hydrogen sulfide in high quantities around you, what would happen to the chemicals that may be mixed with hydrogen sulfide? Would they be a lot more dangerous than the lower levels of hydrogen sulfide? What effect would this have on our health?
Okay, so does Public Health England or CCG want to take that question, please?
Chair, that's not something I have any knowledge on. I'm happy to take that back. That's really all I can say on that topic.
Okay, Richard, could you make comment on that question or not?
I mean, it's a bit of a toxicology question, I think, perhaps for Ovnia. I think the question is, are there other pollutants that might compound the effect of hydrogen sulfide? And probably Ovnia is best qualified to comment on that, if she's able to.
I don't see her online at the moment.
Can't see her online. So, Anthony, we will get back to you on that question. Hopefully, Ovnia will come back online. I'm going to return now to Gary Badley. I've got to make an apology. I think I cut you off before you asked the second part of your question, Gary. So please accept my apologies and feel free to ask the second part of your question now.
If you just hold 1 second, sorry, Gary, I'm just unmuting you on our end. Okay, and if you unmute yourself now, you should be back online.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Gary.
Yeah, yeah, it's a little bit like what the last gentleman just asked. It's basically saying that you've got the individual risk assessments for each of the gases that are being monitored, but is there risk assessments of the danger of these gases when they're mixed together, and what impact could they have on people that are breathing it on a daily basis?
Okay, thank you. And let's see, Ovnia is back. Ovnia, could you take that question, please?
Are you able to hear me? Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I'm sorry. So I
Yes.
think I heard the question. So you're asking whether the mixtures of exposures might affect the overall risks from the exposure to hydrogen sulfide. I hope that's what you asked. Yeah, one of the issues we always have is that we are always exposed to mixtures. One of the, if you like, caveats within the risk assessment is that we look at one compound at a time. So your question is quite pertinent in the sense that, yes, because we're exposed to mixtures, in fact, most of the guidance values are relatively, to use the word conservative, in the sense that they should be protective of most mixtures, but we would have to look at that in more detail when we know what exact exposures are there. So, for example, with the BTEX data and hydrogen sulfide, but we wouldn't expect to see a huge increase in risk because of that mixture of exposure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks over there. The next question then is Neil Thompson, and I think this one's going to be directed towards Martin. So Neil, if you can unmute yourself.
Good evening. Thanks very much for taking my question. I just wanted to mention a correction to the first slide, that the odour has been evident to residents within a 1 mile radius for much longer than January 2021. I thought that was an important point to make, because I know some people will have been irritated by that slide. But my main question was about the mounting evidence of a significant risk to long-term health from peer-reviewed research, and also now from individual health cases from the residents living near Walleys. And bearing in mind what Ogner said earlier about there being an issue, what will it take for the PHE to recognise the risk, rather than just making statements that it believes there's little chance of long-term health problems, such as the one that was made at the top of this evening's meeting?
Okay, so that question, and I know there was a supplementary question that you asked as well around who's in the community cell. So if PHE take the first part of your question, then Martin, you can pick up the second in terms of the community cell. That'd be great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off to try and answer that question. Yeah, I mean, I think as I tried to say in my very short presentation, is that we're now at a stage where the exposure has been going on for depending on where you start, not up to a year. And the reason we have then escalated this to a more strategic level response is because the exposures are continuing, and that we have clearly said that we now stress that we can't exclude longer term exposures if this level of exposure continues for a continued period of time. I hope that clarifies the point. So we are concerned, it's not as though we're not.
Yeah, I could just add a line, Chair. Essentially, the data, we're aware of the site having had issues reported to us as early as 2016. We know about that. There's been previous monitoring. The chemicals team have reviewed that data, even though it's over short periods of time, not as many months as we have currently, up to 2019. And those levels have been very low. And even when they evaluated against the sort of mid-term exposure thresholds that my colleague Ovnia was talking about, they're well below that, and we don't think that those will add anything to the current risk assessment in terms of the data for this year.
Thank you, Nick. And just for the last part of that question then, Martin, are you happy to just state who's in the community?
Yeah, if I can give a quick sweep through. There's colleagues from the council, police, from Chamber of Commerce, the CCG, Public Health England, also the university have been invited to be part of that because of both the business community that's there, and MHCLG are on the group. Now, one of the things that group will be doing is considering the raft of information that's already been provided from the community, both in terms of the impact statements that were provided to the council and have been analysed, the survey work that was done by Aaron Bell MP, and also the information that's coming back from the community in terms of the symptom tracker that the County Council have put in. So there's a range of agencies there with a range of interests, and really making use of all of the information that's already been collected and provided by the community in order to plot a way forward there.
Thank you, Martin. And linked to that question, I guess I'm going to ask Beverly Tompkins to ask your question next. So Beverly, if you could just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Beverly.
I'm just looking at all of the expertise here and all of the campaign and all of the data that we have, and yet nothing has happened. The situation that we're in still continues. And I'm wondering now, if none of this panel can make anything happen, what or who needs to be involved to make something happen? Because it feels quite ridiculous that we're still talking about it, and we're talking about the impact, we're talking about possible long-term health conditions, and yet when everybody goes home this evening, they're still faced with the same problem. So can I put that to the panel now, is what needs to happen next? This is a ridiculous situation.
Okay, thanks, Beverly. I'll take that question on behalf of the panel. We completely understand the situation that you're in, and we do understand the impact that this incident is having on you. Hence the decision to raise it to the Strategic Coordination Group. This allows us to put as many resources from multi-agency partners directed at this incident. It also gives us access to additional information, and it also gives us access to central government. We will, as we've said on the final slide, be meeting on a weekly basis. We're prioritising this work in terms of everybody's attention, and we'll keep the communities updated on a regular basis. I understand the frustrations that you've got. We will work with you to overcome these issues. What we've got to try and do is make sure that that communication channel is kept open, so everybody has got an understanding of what's happening. Granted, it's not fast enough from your perspective, but you've got our commitments in terms of strategic leaders to be able to push this issue on your behalf, and we will push it to the highest level. Thank you. So I'm going to move now next to Chris Hannon. And Chris, your question, I think, is directed at the EA. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. I think we might be having. You're not doing anything wrong, Chris. You are unmuting yourself for whatever reason. We're not hearing you when you're talking down the line. So apologies for that. We will put your question to the panel on your behalf, though.
Okay, so this is a question for EA colleagues from Chris. Has there been any toxicology samples taken from any of the wildlife in and around the landfill, i.e. seagulls, rats, foxes, frogs, etc.?
So Chris, again, I think we've spoken about this before. There hasn't from wildlife around the site. What there is an extensive network of monitoring boreholes and environmental considerations that are part of the routine operations of the site, and those are monitored and they are available. But we haven't taken any from the wildlife directly around the site.
Thanks, Claire. Patricia Wettenall, your question is next. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, Patricia. You're unmuted on our end. So if you just look for the microphone icon on your dashboard, it's at the top of the dark grey box. If you give that a click, we should be able to hear your question. If not, we'll put it to the panel for you. Just give you a few seconds.
Okay, I'll ask that question on Patricia's behalf then. Can I ask why Red Industries Walleys are still allowed to take landfill in while this is going on? I cannot understand, because to my mind, surely they would move quicker on this if they couldn't operate and take money while we're all suffering. So EA colleagues, do you want to take that one, please?
Yeah, I'll take that question, Chair. I know this question has been asked before on previous communication events. We've been very clear that, you know, stopping waste going onto site isn't the solution to dealing with the issues that we're facing with the gas. What we are obviously focusing on with the operator is the actions that we have asked them to carry out to date, and those actions that we have asked them to carry out going forward over the next few months, which were all documented on the slides of my timeline that I showed earlier. I can appreciate, you know, what people are seeing in terms of that waste going in, but we have explained before that is not contributing to the gas and the odours that are being experienced now by the community. And by stopping that going in, from our perspective, isn't going to resolve the solution, and our efforts and focus is all being on the remediation actions that I've shown on the slide earlier.
Thanks, Mark, and hopefully, Patricia, you heard that answer. I'm going to move back now to Stephen Murray. Stephen, you've got a question directed at PHE.
Hello, can you hear me?
We've got you, Stephen. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, you went dead there. Yeah, it's a question regarding PHE publication actually, where it's clearly stated that long-term chronic exposure to H2S is just as bad to health as an acute short-term exposure. As we've been suffering chronic long-term exposure to H2S, how do you reconcile what you've just said regarding the health effects and the reality of what we're experiencing?
Okay, have we got a panelist to take that question, please?
Ofne, are you happy to take that?
Okay, I think
Ofne has dropped off the call. So
I didn't hear the first part of the question. Did you say acute? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'll just read the question then. In a PHA publication, it's clearly stated that long-term chronic exposure to hydrogen sulfide is just as bad as health as an acute high-level short-term exposure. As we've all been exposed to the low levels for over 7 months now, how do you reconcile this with the statement that the health effects are likely to be short-term? Ovnai, did you get that question? Okay, we seem to have an issue with Ovnai at the moment. We'll come back to that question in a minute if she rejoins the call. I'm going to move on now to a question from Michelle Bath. Michelle, if you unmute yourself, you're free to speak to the panel.
Hello, can you hear me?
Michelle, go ahead with your question, yeah.
Yes, my father lives in the Thistleberry area, and he's got, you know, very vulnerable. He's got heart failure, breathing difficulties, and ever since this issue's been much greater in that area, he's having a constant runny nose every single day, which prevents him from eating because he can't, says that he just doesn't have an appetite when his nose is constantly streaming. So he's lost a significant amount of weight over the last 12 months, and his doctor's really concerned. It's gone on his notes that it may be contributed to the environmental health situation. But for us, is there a monitor or something that we could put in his property that would tell us if the gas is actually in his property all the time? Because then we'd obviously look at moving him, because he's 87. So, you know, so it was just, is there something that we could do to establish, is that gas causing that issue, or is it something else?
Okay, so I'll ask, I think, CCG question in part, but also an EA question. So panelists, can you just step in, please?
I'm not sure I can answer that. Obviously, the CCG is responsible for commissioning the health services that we provide and to support the population. In terms of monitoring within the home, I'm not sure I can contribute to that.
Chair, I mean, can I say to the speaker first, a horrible situation, absolutely, and I'm sure everybody's hearts are with you on that. I think, though, this is probably a question maybe for Newcastle in terms of the monitoring in homes. The Environment Agency isn't able to monitor in homes, I'm afraid, so it's not one that we have any expertise on, but I don't know whether others who do can help.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle, thanks for that question. From the monitoring that we've done in homes, it's unlikely that there's a permanent presence, because it very much is an issue that comes and goes, we don't have equipment that we can put long term in people's homes to do that sort of analysis. I think one of the things, obviously your father's GP will probably have a good handle on whether or not this is the issue, or whether there's something else that is at play there. And I think one of the other things that's probably worth considering, and I think it's very much unproven at the moment, but there are air purifiers around which may be worth trying, but I can't say that those definitely work. I haven't got any analysis to say that they definitely work, but it may be something that's worth considering.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the question. So I've got a couple of questions from Steve Billington, who doesn't have a mic, so I'll read those out. So how can you do a risk assessment on the gas mix when the EA haven't done a chemical analysis on the gas being emitted? And the second part of that question is, if capping is the answer to reducing the gas, how come you claim only capping 70% is the same as capping 100%, which you could do if you close the site? So both of those questions towards Claire and Mark, please.
So Rob, I'll take those questions. So I'll go to the second question first, if that's okay, around the capping. I know that there's obviously been a lot of comments from the community about closing the site and having the site completely capped off. What we've always explained around that is that that's not going to stop, what's currently in the ground producing those gas and those emissions. And one thing that we have to be careful about as the Environment Agency, as the regulator, is that we have to, we have a duty to carry out as a regulator and operate legally, and ask the operator in this situation to do things that doesn't put us in a position where we will be challenged, and where by the operator, and the operator becomes successful in that challenge. So by completely capping it 100% is what I know people want, but it isn't, unfortunately, the way that we can go about it at this moment. So what we are looking at is how we can get the operator to cap as much as is possibly can be done on that site to contain, as I said, through our kind of strategy of those gases, without obviously causing any unnecessary safety risks on the site whilst taking place. In terms of the first question, can that just be repeated again, please, Chair?
So Mark, I think I heard this one, and I think this was about the composition of the gas, wasn't it? And in terms of how do we know what to monitor for when there hasn't been that assessment. So there is regular monitoring that happens as part of the permit conditions, happens throughout every single year, which is passed to us. That information has been available, and right the way since March, so well before we started the process with partners that we're in now. we've been working with members of the panel here and their organisations to determine what monitoring is needed. So it was a group of the relevant organisations that agreed where the additional 2 monitors would go and what those monitors would measure. And that group is what is now on the slide that we saw at the beginning, termed the stack. So that's the air quality cell, and it is that group of people and experts from across health as well as regulation and landfill expertise, which are looking at what needs to be monitored there. So that is part of it, and it is also feeding into what Mark explained right at the very beginning about the 3 elements: contain, capture and destroy. And obviously capping is an important part of that, but it's not the whole answer. And that's why we need to be working with partners on that gas composition as well as the broader solutions.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Mark. I've got a couple of questions now from Thomas Curie. I'm just trying to find them on my sheet. There we go. So Thomas, you've got 2 questions. They are short ones, so if you ask them both together, I'm sure the panel will pick those up, and they're aimed at the EA in the main.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, so why are you so unwilling to close this site? You've closed other sites for much less. Why are you so unwilling to close this site in particular? That's my first question. My second question is more to the EA and PHE. Why are people in Silverdale 58% more likely to have lung cancer than the national average?
Okay, so the first question, Claire, Mark, do you want to take that, please?
So Mark's explained this before, and I'm happy to give it again. We are not in a position where we have got the legal powers to close this site. Where we have done so on other sites in the past, firstly, they have generally been temporary closures while there have been specific problems that have been sorted out. And secondly, those problems have been because there has been an issue that has been directly related to taking of fresh waste onto site. That's not what is happening here. And that means that if we did try to close the site or to suspend the permit on that basis, the operator would quite likely challenge us. I have no problem with them challenging us on decisions where we are pushing them to do more or to do things differently. But in this case, depending on the route of challenge they took, it could affect our ability to regulate the site in other ways. And that might mean that we couldn't require them to do what we're asking them to do now, what we're instructing them to do now, which is dealing with the waste that's in the site. So that would end up causing a longer problem, a bigger problem for the community. And everything we're doing is about trying to resolve the problem as quickly as possible and as permanently as possible. And we genuinely don't believe that is the right answer in this case here.
Thanks, Claire. The second part of the question then was around why are people in Silverdale 58% more likely to get lung cancer than the national average? Can a panel member pick that one up, please?
I could kick off there, Chair. Can you hear me? I'm having a few difficulties. I would just say that the WHO levels that are monitored, the reason we use those is that they give one a very clear, internationally based and accepted standard. Now, at the levels of, for example, hydrogen sulfide, actually all the other chemicals monitored have not breached any guideline levels, and those are the particulates, the nitrous oxide and the methane. But in terms of the hydrogen sulfide, the levels have been, aside from the 2 days we had a 24-hour breach, the levels have been where you would, based on international evidence, you would not expect any long-term physical health due to toxicological exposure. In other words, I'm not talking about, and I'm not belittling the issues the community have in terms of ongoing exposure to nuisance gases causing symptoms and stresses and mental health issues. I'm not relating. I'm talking about the scientific approach, which tries to ensure that the population is safe. Now, those levels have been below that. We would therefore not expect any changes or significant irreversible changes in the population. Now, of course, cancer rates and cancer relate and are caused by a variety of conditions, and to simply equate or simply compare cancer rates in a population, for example, like Silverdale, and try and relate that to environmental exposures like that wouldn't be possible. There are other issues that cause cancer, and particularly in these populations where there's some mining history and other histories, one would expect different rates. And I think my other colleagues would be able to comment in much more detail, but I think that's the bottom line. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and thanks for that answer. I'm going to go now to Audrey Young. Audrey, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you've got time to ask your question now.
Thank you. First of all, can I just go back on what Martin said regarding air purifiers? One, we shouldn't really have to buy them just to breathe fresh air. And two, they don't actually stop the toxic fumes from coming into our homes. And the second is to Public Health England. In light of Dr. Ian Zinker's report, which clearly states that due to landfill pollution, our children and community are at high risk of health implications, can I ask how long it will take public health to protect us from this?
Okay, I'll step in terms of the Dr. Sinner's report. We have had sight of that earlier today. It is a lengthy report and it will need to be reviewed in detail before we make comment on that report. And then a formal response, if appropriate, will be produced. So I wouldn't want panel members to answer questions directly around Dr. Sinner's report. But if you want to take up the second part of that question about protecting the communities from this, I'm sure you can give some answer to Audrey.
Chair, I can't ascertain. Is my colleague Ovnia online?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, okay.
Can you?
In terms of I think the questions relates to, basically, do air purifiers have an effect? Is it worth investing in? I mean, the little bit of knowledge I have on this topic is that there's certainly no evidence, but I'd refer to Ovnia if she's got any further information on that.
No, I would agree with you, Nick. There's no evidence that air purifiers would be of value. We haven't looked at that in detail, but I haven't seen any evidence on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you then. I'm going to move on now to a question from, sorry, I just can't see the name on my screen. From Alan Ware. Alan, do you want to unmute your mic and we can take your question, please?
Hi, Alan. If you just, you're unmuted on our end. So if you just look for the microphone symbol in the dark grey box on the right-hand side of your screen, give that a click and we should be able to hear you. We'll give you a few seconds. If we can't get you on mic, we'll pop your question to the panel for you. But yeah, just the microphone icon on at the top of the dark grey box.
No, okay. Seems you're having a problem with Alan's microphone. I'll read out the question then. It was reported on the BBC News on the 14th of February 2011 that the previous owners, Lafarge, stated that the odour smells were recognised as unable and may never go away. Mark said at the outset that the EA containment measures did not have the effect they thought. So how can you be confident that the odours are solely down to the landfill site? There are other sites around the country that have landfill sites without apparent issues. So EA, do you want to pick that one up, please?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of when I mentioned saying that the effects hadn't taken place, that was in reference to the most recent capping work that happened at the roundabout March time of this year. So obviously way before the 2011 issues that came when Lafarge were the operator and held that permit. You know, the work that we have got the operator to do to date, and the work that we are instructing the operator to carry out over these coming months, you know, we are closely looking at that and making sure that those are the most appropriate steps to start tackling the gas issues that are still happening within the community. So for me, the situation that we find ourselves currently is that the operator and the actions that are in place that they need to be doing over the coming months, and what we're seeing with the actions that have been taking place to date, is starting to show some slight improvements around that gas monitoring. So with regards to the air quality monitoring data that we get on a weekly basis, the most recent data that we have received around the levels of hydrogen sulfide, which was between the end of June and the 4th of July, where they were above the World Health Organization's 30-minute average odour annoyance levels. It was between 1% and 10% above that annoyance level for that week, which is just gone. If we compare that to a month ago, which was around the 24th of May to the 30th of May, that was 7% to 47%. So we are starting to see from the data that's coming through an improvement with regards to those annoyance levels. Bearing in mind and completely appreciate they are still not satisfactory and they still need to come down, but it is heading in the right direction. And the actions that we are asking the operator to do with regards to more capping, more installations of wells, and improvements on that gas utilisation plant, we are looking for those to keep that trend going in the right direction, which is reducing those annoyance levels.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
I am going to two people who've had their hands up. I didn't notice that in the sidebar, so apologies for that in terms of the delay. So Amy Baddeley, if you ask your question first, please. Can't hear anything from Amy, so I'll go to Annie Miles next, please. You've got your hand up.
Hi, Annie. We can see you're unmuted. We can't hear you. If we'll give you a few more seconds, it might be that your microphone on your end isn't working. If not, do you want to send us your question via the chat? Because we haven't got it on there at the moment. So if you send us your question via the chat and we'll put it to the panel for you. Apologies that you have unmuted, but it might be that you don't have microphone access on your end because we can't hear you coming through. Okay, so I'll put you back on mute now, but if you pop your question via the question box, we'll pop that to the panel for you. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go next then to Stephen Murray. Stephen, if you can unmute yourself and ask your next question, please.
Yeah, as there is a clear breach of Human Rights Act specifically pertaining to the welfare of children, what are your intentions in respect of this breach?
So in terms of panel members, to answer that question, is anybody going to indicate to take that question, please? No. Okay, what we'll do, Stephen, we'll get an answer to you on that one by consulting with other people in the strategic coordination group. Thank you. So if we go now to Amanda Mercer. Amanda, if you can unmute yourself, you've got access to the panel.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, so you're basically saying that Red dumped illegal waste previously, and that's why it's so bad now.
So if that's the case, are you going to prosecute Red for the taxpayers' money spent investigating this, plus the harm they've caused the local and not so local residents? And how can you be 100% sure they will manage the site correctly in the future, seeing as how many breaches they continue to have? And that's for the EA, please.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll bring EA colleagues in on that one, please.
So Amanda, we've spoken a little bit about this one in the past, and I mentioned it earlier tonight. We are not saying that sanctions for Walleys Quarry Limited are off the table. Absolutely far from it. What we are saying is that our focus right now is on making sure that we're resolving the issues and that we're doing absolutely everything we can. If I was to ask my team to start building a case to look at sanctions for the operator, then I would have to divert resources away from those who are working to reduce the odours at the site. And I don't believe that's the right thing to do for the community. So that's absolutely not what I'm going to do. We have also spoken, though, about the fact that I understand, of course, this adds to the frustration across the community, that it feels like they're getting away with it. There are some other penalties that are on them. So the non-compliances that they have are grouped together, and they affect the charges that the company has to pay for their permit. It's not a large amount of money, but that is something that is set by the Treasury, and it's not something that's within the Environment Agency's control. We are also recharging them for much of the work that the Environment Agency is doing in relation to the increased regulation on site. And the bills that we gave them just in the first couple of months of this were equivalent to the annual permit. So they were, whilst they may not be big amounts, they were in relation to, substantial in relation to their annual bills. And then the last bit is we have already required the company to step up above what we would ordinarily require it to do, what the checks that it's doing to the waste that is coming onto site. We are giving them a much higher level of scrutiny, and we gave them a much higher level of scrutiny even before this happened, and that is not something that is stopping anytime soon. And then the last bit is that this is an issue that is not just about the landfill operator. This is also about what is happening through the waste management chain. So that's all the way from the waste that is taken from our homes when we pay somebody to take it away, to where it ends up in the landfill. And the team is focusing on those who are sending the waste directly to Walleys Quarry and understanding where there are issues there as well. So this is not a small operation that the team is looking at in relation to this, or indeed that we do across the country every day.
Thanks, Claire. We're going to move on now to a couple of questions that have come from Stephen Billington. So Stephen, if you can unmute yourself, you're good to go.
Hi, Stephen. Just look for the microphone icon on the dark grey box on the right-hand side of your screen. You're unmuted on our end, so if you give that a click, we should be able to hear you. We'll give you a few seconds, and if not, we'll pop your questions to the panel on your behalf.
Okay, nothing coming from Stephen. So, question from the for the EA again. Have you taken a sample for analysis by GC-MS or FTIR, so you know what compounds are being released? And wasn't that the last week on May the worst ever week?
Rob, it's Mark, sorry. To be honest, I'm not sure in terms of those issues. What I would suggest is, can I get that question directed to me with Stephen's again email address, if we can get hold of that, and we'll put a direct response back to him.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Mark. Next couple of questions then. We've got another one from Stephen Murray. So Stephen, do you want to ask your question, please?
Yeah, I'd like to clarify a few points, please. One of which is with regard to PHE providing the EA advice on public health issues resulting from the information provided by the EA to PHE on the levels of gases. The methodology for collecting and interpreting those results is utterly flawed. They bear no resemblance to what happens in a well-sealed new build house at all, in any shape or form. So your advice to the EA regarding the health effects are completely flawed. They're based on misinformation. So how do you correlate the health effects that are being suffered by children, the elderly, those with chronic diseases? How the hell do you do that based on misinformation?
Okay, panel members, who can take that one, please?
I'm happy to start. It's Avnaya here. Yeah, I'm sorry, I switched my video. Connection problem, so forgive me, the video is not there. Yeah, thank you for the question. The data we get from the Environment Agency is for external levels, and the guidance values that we're comparing them to is for exposure via external levels. Now, in a well-sealed home, we haven't taken, or I don't think the Environment Agency is able to take data from inside the house. But the comparisons that we're doing are as standard. So looking at guidance values that are published and the external exposure data that is supplied by the monitors. So I would contend that it's not flawed. Thank you.
No, so I'm going to move on now to Johnny Joseph. Johnny, you've got a question for the EA, please.
Hi, Johnny. If you're able to unmute yourself, just look for the microphone icon on the dark grey box on the right side of your screen. We understand that a few of our viewers don't have microphone access on their laptops, so if that's the case with yourself, we'll pop your question to the panel on your behalf. We'll give you a few seconds, but no worries if not. We will put your question to the panel. Okay, I think we can.
Okay. So Johnny's question is, how much further are we into finding out why the toxic gas is travelling so far? After 2 months since you announced you were working with people that were specialists, I trust you have some answers by now. So Mark or Claire, do you want to take that one, please?
So Chair, I think this might actually be something that the STAT group have been starting to consider in terms of that monitoring of or the modelling of the gases from the landfill and the dispersion and travel of them. So it may be one that Nick or Avnaya can come back on.
It's Avnaya here. I would have no information on dissipation of hydrogen sulfide. That's not part of toxicology.
Yeah, I could just add that I know that is in the train of work at the moment. Just to say that one would expect that hydrogen sulfide, that the smelling, being able to smell hydrogen sulfide, would be able to disperse, and we can see that from even the symptoms reported, that there's a difference in the distance from the sites, but the actual modelling of that is absolutely key to relate that to levels and understand how that dispersion is taking place in relation to the Met Office data and other data. So that's still in train, and we will share that when it's available.
Thanks everyone for that. I've got a couple of questions that we've had in via email. The first one's from Nicola Taylor, that is concerned about the levels of hydrogen sulfide and the studies that have been done on rats. Now, Nicola's pregnant at the moment, and she wants to know, how can you assure me that my unborn babies are not going to suffer adverse effects from my inhaling levels of hydrogen sulfide gas that we detected in the Gale monitoring station when the medium-term exposure was so close to the MRL for what is probably safe just for the non-vulnerable? And secondly, how am I supposed to regulate the room temperature for my premature babies that I will be bringing home this month when I can't open the windows due to the excessive levels of hydrogen sulfide that enter my home? So panel, I'll open that up. There's a number of answers to that. So who wants to start us off, please, around the effects of the hydrogen sulfide on unborn babies?
It's Savnaya here. I can start with that, thank you. So yeah, one of the things that we always consider during any risk assessment is the potential effects on an unborn child, so obviously for a pregnant lady. And for hydrogen sulfide, there's no evidence to show that the unborn fetus is affected by exposure to hydrogen sulfide at levels that don't affect the mother. So in other words, if they're at levels below the guidance value, we would not expect an effect on the fetus. Of course, as we've always said, if there is any concern, you should see your GP, especially as you're pregnant.
Thank you, Avnaya. Another question now from David Jones that's come in via email. It's a question for PHE colleagues. How you have made statements that the risk of long-term health issues arising from exposure to the chemicals emitted from the landfill is small. As an asthma sufferer and directly adversely affected by the exposure, I would like you to signpost me to the data that you've relied on to make your statements regarding the risk. So PHE, please.
Yeah, it's Avnaya again. Yes, I think as I tried to say earlier, the guidance values are based on the general public, and we've clearly stated that the likelihood of exacerbating asthma is a higher risk for people who've already got asthma. So that's clear that even though for the general public and the levels are below those guidance values, that we think that the long-term health effects are minimal. But we have stressed that now that the exposures are going on for longer, we do have a concern. But people with breathing issues such as asthma may experience increased frequency or severity of their symptoms. And we have published that in our risk assessment.
Okay, thanks, Avnaya. And another question from Chloe Young that's come in. It's aimed at public health, but Richard, you might want to comment on it as well. So on a previous EA engagement phone call, Chloe informed us that she'd had a bad mental health breakdown. This was due to exhaustion from being woken up every night and physically vomiting from the gases inside her home. She's been suffering from asthma that she hasn't suffered with for 15 years. And she'd just like to put it to us that this doesn't seem to be a short-term impact, rather long-term. Can we explain to Chloe what steps she can take to support herself with the asthma issues and any further respiratory illnesses that she's suffering, as well as the mental health implications?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think the best advice for Chloe, and it does sound like a horrible situation, is to talk to a GP. I mean, GPs should be there to support people, both for their physical health problems like asthma, as well as their mental health problems. And I think the GP is the first port of call in this situation. I don't know if Mark wants to add anything to that.
I would agree. Thanks, Richard. And certainly my role here today has been very quiet. It's about accessing services and getting the support you need for your health-related problems. Certainly, the GP would be the best place. Your asthma medication may need to be adjusted. It may need to be changed. But basically, your GPs can only manage your symptoms. And clearly, ideally, if this problem's causing the symptoms, it would be better if it went away. But certainly your GPs are there to support you with your symptom management, and that's what you should be doing in terms of speaking to them. In terms of mental health services, there are other services that you can access, and I know there's been some links on the EA website around this case of services that people can access, as well as your GP being able to signpost you to the statutory and mental health services, as well as some of the voluntary sector support services that are there. But certainly there are services there that you can access. Clearly it won't make the problem go away, but it can certainly make your life more comfortable.
I am conscious that it was due to end at 7, but I'm quite happy to extend the session a little while, just so we can cover these last few questions off. Johnny Joseph, if we go to you next, please.
I think Johnny wasn't able to come on mic earlier.
Okay, so Johnny had problems with his mic earlier. His question is, are Public Health England working with GPs so they actually understand what is going on? Because many GPs are unaware of how to deal with it.
I'll take that in the first instance, Chair. It's a good point. Although I would disagree in that GPs are well trained to deal with the management of symptoms related, as Mark has just pointed out. I would say that in terms of highlighting the specific issues, the risks, what it means and what they can expect in terms of population and their patients attending their surgeries, a communication is going out that details that and gives them additional references, and that's been agreed with our other health partners, and that will be going out imminently, just to support them in that kind of approach. And I think that would be fair and just. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. We've got a question from Ryan Bembo, and unfortunately, due to a noisy daughter, Ryan can't speak on mic, so I'll happily read Ryan's question out for him. So, read to this data denying that the hydrogen sulfide is coming from their site and are blaming everywhere else with no evidence. When will you put out a statement clarifying that they are the main and potentially only source of the hydrogen sulfide? So, EA colleagues, do you want to pick that one up, please?
Yeah, Rob, I can start that if you want. So, as Claire has mentioned actually earlier in this call, we have substantiated hydrogen sulfide and gases coming from that site. So, there is evidence that, the landfill is producing those gases. As probably many members on this call are aware, that the operator has published a report that is saying that there are other sources that could be contributing to that hydrogen sulfide, and as a partnership around the SCG, we have all received that report, and we are now collating our response back to that, which we will give back to the operator, and if that's appropriate, we'll obviously put that response through the SCG or as single partner organisations back to the to the public domain. So the bottom line is that there is evidence there. Walleys Quarry, if you are under any belief that they are still denying that it isn't there, we as an organisation have substantiated hydrogen sulfide from that site, and that is why we are instructing them to carry out the actions that we have done today and those actions going forward. And from the Environment Agency's perspective and the team that's working with me, we are doing everything and will continue to do everything to get those actions done as soon as practically possible to help resolve this situation.
And Rob, if I just add to that, just to say, we've obviously spoken to Walleys Quarry ahead of receiving that report about it, and been incredibly clear with them that nothing in that report gives them license to not take forward the actions that we're requiring them to do to stop the odour from the landfill. They have told us they're in agreement with that, and we have not had any issues with any of the actions we've been asking them to do, being late or being questioned. They are doing them, and they're doing them to time, and we will continue to keep that pressure up. We will, as Mark said, respond on the report, but we are not using that as any kind of complacency to not do the actions that Mark talked through at the beginning.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Mark. I am going to now bring this session to a conclusion. I'd just like to thank everybody for your questions. I'd like to thank the panelists for their answers and for participating in tonight's event. Any questions that do come in after this deadline, we'll endeavour to get back to you in terms of answering those questions via email. I just thank you for your patience in terms of some of the technology issues we've had today. It's never easy when we're trying to manage such a high volume of questions in a short period of time, but we will endeavour to get you the answers that you require. I'm also just minded to just reiterate that we are aware of the issues and the impact that this incident is having. We're working collectively through the Strategic Coordination Group to try and find solutions on your behalf. And as I've said earlier, we're now adding pressure and got that link through to central government to try and progress these issues on your behalf. Thank you for attending, and watch out for further communications that will be out very shortly. Thank you.